Hello, I'm Katie Walker. I'm here with Paul Untaguk, and we're going to talk about the relevance of school knowledge to rural Alaskans. And Paul, I've heard some teachers say they wonder what is important to teach students if the student's just planning to stay in the village.
It's a really important topic because it really is asking how relevant is what we are teaching in school for people in rural Alaska and for the communities as well as the individuals. I think it's an important question in part because it means the educators have to ask that question about what they are teaching and be prepared to move from curriculum that's made for Minnesota, Texas, and California. And that is a whole subject in and of itself. Are we prepared? Do we know? Have we been provided the resources so that we can make those connections with the lives of people in rural Alaska and for the future of these students and communities? There's a text that I like about this, but it's not about rural Alaska. It's actually about rural Canada. And it was written by Michael Corbett, and it's called Learning to Leave, The Irony of Schooling in a Coastal Community. And the tenor of the argument is both the students and the community understand that the kind of standardized curriculum that they're being provided and that are being taught in the schools isn't helping the future of the community. In fact, it's undermining the future of the community because it really is about teaching students to lead the community itself. I think that's the same problem that we experience. I also see it as, well, then we don't need to do college preparation, or we don't need to do calculus, or we don't need to have English literature with Romeo and Juliet. And, it becomes all these arguments for why we can just ease up a bit on the academics in the school setting. I think the future of rural Alaska is already tied to a historic shift in what we will need to know in order to have a positive future for rural Alaskan communities. If you're in rural Alaska and you say, well, I'm going to hunt, I'm going to do some fishing, I'm going to do subsistence activities, I'm going to do some work around the community, so, I don't see the connection on all of this. And I think what that does is it makes us have to reconsider. So when we're teaching about culture, are we doing traditional dance as an activity, a celebration, but not as a part of the curriculum? And if we're teaching something about the history of these communities, from whose perspective are we teaching this view of the community, the trajectory that it's taken? If I'm in Southeast Alaska and I'm trying to teach about community and cultures and the history of the state, the Alaska Studies requirement, if I'm not doing the shelling of Angoon or the shelling of cake by the U.S. military, I think it's a disservice. It's leaving out an important chapter of these events that make the communities as they are today. It's part of that wave of history. I think that reading, literature, I find schools that will say, hey, our students aren't interested in reading at all. And my thinking on that is they probably aren't interested in what you have for reading. That there's an enormous amount of literature that connects to the history of these communities, either rural Alaska in general or the particular community that you're teaching at, that can be found, especially now with the internet, with the accessibility of it. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of work. You have to cull through it. And sometimes you have to frame it as, I'm not teaching this story, which is a view of a missionary about the community. I'm not viewing it as true. I'm wanting students to understand this was their view and be able to have a discussion about that. Because if people in our communities don't understand how to understand the views of other people, you're not going to be able to intervene accurately and persuasively on what's important for that community. I think about fishing and all these regulations that pop up, and they all have this premise of being scientific. And if you don't have a way of critiquing the science that is attached to it, then you can't show how it's flawed. The difference between these scientific work and the regulation that's proposed is often enormous. However well-intentioned, it's often enormous. And that needs to be something that the community can take apart. Somebody in the community has to be able to do that. I think there's a confluence. There's this kind of whitewater rapids that we're moving into as Alaska Native communities, where more and more regulators are showing up from a variety of agendas. And some are state, some are conservationists, some are the feds, different parts of the federal government. Some are in education. They have this generic kind of view of what they want students to know and be able to do. And one of the rich things about rural Alaska is that it's not generic. The distinctions are, in fact, one of the strengths. It's the wonderful part of this. So why not have an education that allows students to understand there are trade-offs, urban and rural living? There are trade-offs. You've got some benefits, you've got some problems. And it's not as though one should be preferred over the other for the student. We shouldn't be making that decision for the student. And on a more important note, when I have a 14 or 15-year-old say, well, I'm just going to stay, so I don't need to know this, as an educator, you just have to have a position that says, I don't know if that's true or not. I know a few 14, 15-year-olds who change their mind over time. And when you make that change of mind, I want the education that we've provided and that you've developed will allow you to make that choice, that you're not trapped because of the limitations of what you've learned while we've been teaching in this setting. So if we're going to move away from the learning to leave mentality that's so well described by Michael Corbett, we have to rethink our role. We have to rethink the curriculum. We have to rethink our commitment to meeting the unique opportunities, helping the students to see the unique opportunities of being a part of the future of these rural communities.